lower Chinese demand for U.S. corn and soybeans, and the reduction in wheat production in the world. Jerry Gidel is ready to assess all that and more right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. So, Jerry, before we get into the US-China negotiations, we have had the USDA report, and what have you seen on the report?
Well, the USDA's report here in May is always an interesting one. It's the first really look at the upcoming new crop, U.S. and world production numbers around and that, and particularly this year with the heavy, the nasty weather in the Southwest. In that southern plains, the U.S. winter wheat crop was reduced at this point significantly. Jesus, over 200 million bushels at this point. And the that and the world numbers on wheat because of reductions in really the Southern Hemisphere expectations for this coming year in Australia and Argentina, and that because of the impact of El Nino. And El Nino has seemed to have a more significant impact on U.S. wheat prices, wheat production, I should say, than the general expectations were here. Uh, just uh, you know, even a month or so ago. And so the reactions here in that market uh, in wheat definitely carried the load there. The world numbers on corn and soybeans for the coming year were slightly reduced from the bigger carryovers for this year because of some reduced average yield projections that are kind of the standard approach the USDA does in that. But uh, wheat market was really the one that kind of carried the load here for the enthusiasm that pushed prices up pretty significantly here to some interesting levels that we had thought about making some sales at and actually got to before because of it. Interestingly enough, U.S. winter wheat tour also occurred this week. Uh, Interesting, in the past, they've waited another week past the report, but because of the early season warmth in the Southwest and the drought issues down there, they went ahead and had their number. They were out there Tuesday through Thursday, and that went across northern Kansas the first day, and then came through the South west and through central Kansas and that back to Manhattan by Thursday. And their number actually came through at 38 bushels for the tour. Actually, that was one bushel above the USDA's 37 bushel, which was substantially down from last year's 53, 54 billion,
Yeah,
50.
yeah, and I think it's important to highlight that the rating of this crop is very, very low in terms of quality.
Oh, combination of quality and uh, 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 that basically the total bushels. Now, I think to some extent, uh, the biggest unknown on the U.S. wheat crop is how many uh, actual harvested acres are going to be. The USDA brought down their harvested acres now pretty significantly, and uh, and that's still probably the biggest unknown now, and that could still slip away further here if we don't see any kind of stability come into this uh, crop size, or excuse me, the weather that we've got projected here. There's not a lot of rain still in the forecast for the Southwest at this point. You know, from Kansas, Colorado southward, major issue. We could take some additional yield, excuse me, additional harvested acres out, and that could even make things more exciting. But right now, unfortunately, the one thing I think it happened was that the tours estimate on Thursday was turns out to be a bushel more, and to some extent. The tour numbers in the past have tended to be below the final numbers here, but at this point they're slightly above this month, so that's about everybody shook up. But in general, here the big next big news is what's happened, or lack of news that happened in Beijing this week.
Yeah, so we basically had the Treasury Secretary saying the negotiations in terms of volume of soybean and corn purchasing by the Chinese world was already taken care of. And at this point, we are not seeing a lot of Chinese demand since they are basically supplied, I guess.
Well, the interesting thing is that they tried to spin it where the new crop commitments here for the 2026-27 year and 28-29. Basically, these were the 25 million metric ton numbers that were out last November when they had their first negotiations back then, and that. But the one thing that we've had initially 12 million metric tons, and there was lots of talk that there was going to be another 6 or 8 of old crop scenario on beans, particularly, and it never did come through. And there's not, at this point at least, the Chinese seem to have got their supplies from either South America or internally at this out of their own stocks. So at this point, they didn't. The U.S. tried to spin that as a confirmation and good news, but it was supposedly done way back in November. So that's a real interesting twist on it. And even the thought that where there was going to be additionally some substantial Chinese purchases of Boeing jets, uh, they were floating around a 500 plane number, and the Chinese maybe committed to 200 to 300 numbers. That was kind of the thought to begin with. So, to some extent, the Trump administration got hurt by the over optimism about what was going to happen, since there really was not anything substantially new in the negotiations for Chinese purchases, and they also didn't get any helping hand from China to muscle Iran on the Straits of Hormuz and the Mid East uh, war situations going on there. At this point, there hasn't been any big time military issues going on in between the U.S. and Iran. There's been skirmishes, but I don't know. It's an interesting world. We've kind of lost into a stalemate here, and nothing's happening. And that's that. When that happens, people don't think they need to be, optimistic about U.S. grains.
Yeah, so you are not very bullish about corn and soybeans at this point?
Well, not really. Right now, we're going to move up a little bit here on plantings this week. I don't know if we're confirmed that we got the U.S. crop completely in the ground here at this point, because, well, they're projecting some rains in the eastern corn belt here this weekend. The one that was supposed to be last night, I don't think really came through the eastern corn belt very much. At this point, we really have to. Here we are in the middle of May, and if the bulk of the crop is in the ground between now and the 1st of June, it's usually there's always going to be some late plantings in there and that. But the one twist on it right now is we do need to get the northern produce areas, Minnesota, North and South Dakota, uh, Wisconsin, to get their plantings in here for corn and soybeans, because they're the ones that are most susceptible to an early freeze or issues down the road and that. So that could provide a little bit of a pop in prices. Right now, this market's, I think, got oversold uh, to some extent as people just bailed out after Thursday and Friday in the corn and soybeans. But fortunately, the prices that popped up ahead from the crop report and before we got to negotiations did kind of clean up our old crop uh, sales with less than the in the 10 or 15% level in both corn and soybeans, and even got a few sales on new crop out there too because November beans uh, got up to $12 and December corn got at $5 levels. And so we've got a little bit of start on the 2025, excuse me, 26, 27 year. And that we'll just have to see what happens to this market as we go forward. But in a classic sense of things here, um, the this administration needs to be able to understand that the markets want to be surprised with positive things, not be overestimated as what will happen if
Now, on the
that
other
happens.
hand, I think that wheat prices may go up considering the weather in the United States and the fact that there won't be any significant change. Yesterday, we had some news that the Argentinian government might reduce export taxes on wheat, but at this point, it can't really change the blending intention since many of decisions were already taken.
Oh, definitely. That's the whole thing on wheat right now. This high prices and dynamic change in prices in here in the U.S. Uh, uh, in that it really kind of snuck up on everybody, and so uh, right now, uh, there's been some reports coming out of Russia too that their weather over there has been cooperative about getting their spring wheat crop in, and then the high cost of putting wheat in the ground in Argentina and uh, Australia this last or later this summer and fall, which is they're on the opposite side of the world. So on southern hemispheres, crops come in the spring and not in the summer, or excuse me, situation. So that's the thing. Wheat is probably the one that has some more volatility, and particularly if we do have further issues there. Corn and soybeans, though, we came in with some substantial carryover situations in that. So uh, they're going to kind of play their own game and at maybe a different level than the wheat is. But at the same time, uh, the classic scenario in the world of commodities is that wheat is the first long is the leader. Then you end up having traditionally beans next, and then corn kind of comes in at the end of the cycle of prices and that. So to some extent, the prospects for something higher than the 750 prices here in July is, I think, a possibility, but it might not come until later. We could be a month or so away, or 6 weeks away before that particular scenario rears its heads again. Post-harvest wheat, and when we really get a good sense of what the harvest is about, will be where that, and that ties in basically with the uncertainty of corn and soybeans in that late July August period when the U.S. yields are determined. I'm still kind of surprised that about last year's yields, and I think in the corn side of things, we're going to find also that how many bushels are left in the bin here in late June on that report could tell us that last year's 186 bushel yield of the USDA might be a tad optimistic when it's all said and done. The first two quarterly stocks reports have kind of suggested that maybe the corn stocks were not reflecting what the USDA's projection turned out to be last January. So there's some longer term optimism, but right now we took quite a blow with this setback this week.
All right. Thank you very much.
You bet. Take care, and we'll see how this weather turns out. This week we're finally going to get some 80s in Chicago after it's been a month. We had 80s a month ago, but not now.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Jerry, we have had a week with soybeans really close to $13 a bushel. Sorry, $12 a bushel, and then corn um, at 456, also jumping, but the big rally was for soybeans. And do you think that's still a result of support by the soybean oil?
Oh, yeah, soybean oil is a big part of it, but really this week's markets were really uh, bouncing around pretty dramatically here. We had some really firm prices earlier in the week with the weather's forecast, or at least the delays on some plannings had people concerned about the delays in plannings and that. And also President Trump was very optimistic about the Iranians coming to the table and buckling under and all that kind of stuff. We had a very big breaks midweek. But by Friday, when he decided that to take a few shots at some Iranian oil tankers, the market bounced back pretty dramatically here on Friday. So the Mideast uh, conflict in the Persian Gulf continues to be a major factor in here with the market's also keeping a close eye on the U.S. Spring plantings at this point. To some extent, the forecast here uh, for the coming week still have some pretty open conditions and that on things with the prospects of this year's U.S. corn and soybean plantings to likely get in the ground like it always does here uh, each year. And particularly after we get past mid-May, the producers aren't as picky about what the soil conditions might be. What a contrast, though. Some places in the Midwest have had way too much moisture at times, and while the southeast, south central, southeast, and even the southwest, no, there's not much corn and soybeans planted in Oklahoma and Texas, but that weather down there is highly important too.
Yeah, we have had some improvement in the plains, but with some rain, but also we have seen a rally for wheat.
Oh yeah, wheat is it's been a really kind of a driving force here on things along the way. The West Texas area did have a minor rain out by Lubbock earlier this week, but other than that, most of the Texas Panhandle, western Oklahoma, and western Kansas and up Colorado really didn't have much rain. Actually, interestingly enough, I think one of the factors here that kind of turned some heads, myself included, was the Oklahoma wheat tour that occurred this week and the reports they came out with. Uh, about their expected yields, because really the significant portion of Oklahoma's wheat crop is right along and west of Interstate 35. It goes right through the central part of the state. And boy, they came up with a interesting 47 million production with the state average yield at 23 bushels. That was quite surprising. Last year, I think we were up near 40, and that I was had anticipated some reduced number. It turned up I had to really kind of adjust my number down a little bit further to a number here below 60 million for the state after I saw that one. They do quite an extensive tour. I've been on long ago. I was on that tour and uh, the people involved in it do a very good job. So I'm not denying that that's a possibility. I just don't think the USDA is going to go that far down on the state yield year over year. But in reality of it is, U.S. Winter wheat crop conditions are very poor. Uh, we had just an unchanged, stable weekly U.S. number this week, but in reality of it is that hard red winter wheat areas of the Southwest, we're talking about numbers in the 20% or less, good and excellent. That is not a good prospects in that part of the world, and that could have a significant number. Now, the old game is, will USDA go that far down one time at all? I'm not sure they will, but at the same time, uh, the numbers in the other two, soft red and white wheat numbers are going to be just so-so. So overall, I'm looking for a winter wheat crop that was, excuse me, uh, in the uh, 1.7, excuse me, 1.219. Basically, that's down from 1.4. We're talking about nearly a 200 million decline. Most of that's in hard res, I said. And overall, that's potentially going to tighten up our carryover stock in wheat in the U.S. if that turns out to be the case along the way. So that's something that we're going to be watching at these numbers, as I said, for next week. But right now, the world numbers are kind of interesting in themselves right now because we're going to have the U.S. and China coming together at the end of this coming week. There was a kind of a group over there laying some groundwork ahead of the meetings next week. Interestingly enough, there's been some, I think, optimism from the Trump administration about maybe some more commitments on old crop corn purchases. I think right now everybody seems to be concentrating on making sure that there's this commitment of 25 million metric tons of uh, corn purchases for the coming year, the 26-27 year, versus expecting much in the old crop. If there is some purchases ahead of that report, an old crop, that would be a positive, but I don't think there's a lot of people looking for that out there. The In other news in that world out there, the the we're going to be watching very closely the where prices are at longer term here, and that and El Nino is definitely another feature out here that could impact things longer term. Right now, I think we've already had the impact of some of that already in the wheat crops in the Southwest and South Central on that. So we'll see what that. I'm not anticipating that dryness to pull dramatically into the Midwest, but that will be watched closely here accordingly. The actions here in the markets going forward, though, we'll be looking at South American weather and also what's going on with our expectations here uh, for the Tuesday's report out here as we look towards that. I'm just not looking for a lot of big changes since the USDA tends to utilize their acreage and uh, from back in 1st of March or 1st of April, I should say, along with the trends on yields. So right now, at least, the markets will be looking at that combination of stuff. Uh, we talked about some making some marketings last week on prices, and definitely was a wise move as it approached the $5 mark on new crop and also the $12 mark on uh, new crop soybeans. And I would encourage people to utilize these things to be in that 10 to 20% levels out there. We are just looking at marketing the last 10 to 20% of our old
Yeah,
crop
yeah, and then
needs.
people have to remember that the costs are rising and they only tend to rise even more.
Oh, definitely the issues on a combination of both fertilizers and energy prices are still strong. And but you need to make sure you kind of get some coverage out there for those new crop values out there, because the current administration is anticipating a big pullback in prices on inputs as once something gets settled in the Mideast. But if the prospects of that really happening very quickly are pretty, that prices go up early, so they don't always come down very easily going the other direction because of uh, purchases made and things of that nature. And so people need to cover their costs, the higher costs that they've had incurred to make sure they're staying in business. And that's the reason why they don't fall as fast.
All right, we'll keep in touch and we'll watch out the report next week. Thank you.
Take care, sir. Bye.
If you made it this far, this is for you. If you want deeper insights into how agriculture, geopolitics, and global markets actually connect, subscribe to the Geopolitics Report on Substack. That's where I go beyond the headlines, breaking down the strategies, risks, and shifts shaping the global food system. Subscribe and stay ahead.